Welcome to the Original Self Podcast. I'm Yvette Dakota, owner of Dakota Life Coaching and a psychology-informed life coach. I explore resilience, mindset, and the courage to become your authentic self. This is a space for honest conversations about growth, identity, relationships, and all the messy moments in between that shape who we become. Between the salon chair and coaching sessions, I've watched people move through life in patterns they rarely notice. Patterns that are subtle or familiar and incredibly hard to see from the inside. In the last episode, we explored what happens inside the brain and body when we eat. The more we looked beneath the surface, the more clearly we saw that eating is influenced by far more than hunger or willpower. Today, we're going even deeper by exploring how our relationship with food began long before we ever thought about calories, carbs, or healthy eating, before we had the language, before we formed memories, and perhaps even before we were born. This is episode 19, Born Into It, where your relationship with food really began. Before I get into the science today, I want to note that this episode touches on pregnancy, breastfeeding, and early childhood feeding. But I am in no way suggesting blame with any of the topics that I'm going to discuss. No blame towards the mothers listening and none toward the mothers who raised us. Every mother in this episode story was living inside the same systems this series has described the entire time. The stress, the food environment, conflicting information for sure, and often a lack of support. Nobody was choosing difficulty for their child. I am never saying that. And the influences in this episode were, in most cases, invisible to everyone involved way back, even sometimes today. That includes breastfeeding because everyone is different. Some mothers are unable to produce enough milk to sustain their child. Others can't breastfeed at all. And then there are some that choose only formula. I will share remarkable research on breast milk. But with that said, baby formula has fed healthy children for generations, and no one should ever feel upset about using formula over breast milk. The goal of this episode, again, it's not guilt, it's understanding. Because I believe that once we understand the full picture, we stop carrying around the feeling that this was somehow our fault and our fault alone. Okay, so that's my disclaimer. So let's discuss before we were born, because that might sound weird. But think about the point where, or the moment where we consider the beginning of our complicated relationship with food. Maybe it was the first diet that didn't work, or a comment someone made about our bodies, or the first time we ate past fullness and then felt shame about it. What if none of those situations, none of those experiences were the beginning of our complicated relationship with food? Current research suggests that our first food preferences began in the womb, not at the family table or in front of the television or even in a high chair. As early as the second trimester, the fetus can detect flavors from the mother's diet. It comes through the amniotic fluid. So let's say the mom's eating garlic, carrots, or something that is vanilla. Those flavors from the mother's diet pass into the fluid. The fetus swallows them. And then those early exposures shape food preference after birth. Studies have found that infants whose mothers drank carrot juice regularly during their pregnancy were more accepting of carrot-flavored foods than those with no prenatal exposure to that flavor. I think that's fascinating because the fetus isn't deciding that carrots taste good. They may like them, but it's fundamentally learning that these flavors belong in their world. This is one of the brain's earliest acts of categorizing anything. It's not about preference. It's about what feels familiar and safe. It's not only the flavor that shapes the meaning, but something far older than that. Think about inheritance. When we usually discuss inheritance, we're thinking about eye color, height, curly hair, straight hair, etc. But biology also makes the body carry information about our environment. We carry information whether our environment's safe or is there scarcity, environments of chronic stress. And we don't carry that information as memories in the way you traditionally think of them. We carry it as a biological adaptation that can influence how the next generation responds to the world. Scientists call this epigenetics. That means it explores how life experiences can leave biological fingerprints that extend beyond a single generation. For example, during the final months of World War II, food rations in the Netherlands dropped to a dangerously low level. Researchers later discovered that children born to mothers who experienced this famine showed lasting metabolic changes that persisted for decades. Some of the metabolic changes were they had higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease in adulthood because their developing bodies adapted to an environment of scarcity long before they ever chose their own. Research on intergenerational trauma is similar. Stress and trauma can alter gene expression in a way that affects the next generation's stress response, their anxiety levels, and their metabolic function. In practical terms, this means a child may inherit a nervous system that responds more intensely to stress. They may develop stronger cravings for calorie-dense foods during stressful times or difficult times in their lives. Or they may have cortisol systems that react more quickly. These are not certainties, though, but they are tendencies that echo across generations. When I first learned about this research, I couldn't help but think of my own family and how things that had always felt separate began to feel connected to me. My mom struggled with anxiety during her very difficult pregnancies and also battled bulimia at different points in her life. My grandmother grew up in extreme poverty where food was insecure, and that was a constant reality to them. Throughout her life, though, she cycled between binging and severe food restriction. Those weren't simply individual experiences. They were part of a much longer story that, once again, stretched across generations. I didn't choose any of that, and I certainly didn't cause it, but understanding that doesn't erase my responsibility of choice that I make today. However, it does replace shame with compassion. It reminds me that the story I inherited shaped me before I was even old enough to understand it. And that takes away, like I said in the beginning, some of the shame that I feel that maybe I don't have enough willpower. In episode 18, we talked about the gut microbiome. Once again, that's the trillions of bacteria and other microorganisms that constantly communicate with the brain, and it influences cravings and help regulates the hormones of hunger and fullness. Well, they're hormones that stimulate hunger and fullness. But what I really want to know is, how does the microbiome develop in the first place, right? One of the most fascinating discoveries in recent decades is that the microbiome begins to develop during our earliest days of life. During a vaginal birth, babies encounter their mother's microbial community, while babies born by cesarean first encounter microbes from the skin and surrounding environments. Research has shown that these different beginnings can shape the infant microbiome. They will influence immune development, metabolism, and the ongoing conversation between the gut and the brain. It doesn't mean that one child is destined for better health than the other, or that birth alone determines that future. Thankfully, the microbiome continues to change throughout infancy and well into adulthood. Another thing that affects the infant microbiome is early antibiotic use. While often medically necessary and life-saving, it can reduce bacterial diversity. Research has linked these changes to a higher risk of obesity, allergies, and metabolic dysfunction later in life. But again, the good news is that the microbiome continues to strengthen through the rest of your life. And a healthy environment and lifestyle will also strengthen it. These early influences matter, for real, but they don't determine the rest of our story. Scientific findings that breast milk is not a fixed formula are extraordinary. Check this out. The milk changes or adjusts when an infant is fighting an infection. We're like little aliens. The milk will contain increased immune factors, the white blood cells, and antibodies targeted to what the infant's body needs at that specific moment. The mother's body appears to be reading the infant's biology and responding in real time. It's producing something closer to personalized medicine than food. It's so trippy. You guys may have known this. I did not know this. I think it's so cool. Breast milk also contains complex sugars that the infant can't digest, but that feed specific beneficial bacteria in the infant's gut. So in other words, breast milk is feeding the microbiome as much as it's feeding the infant. It's building an ecosystem that will spend decades communicating with the brain. So cool. I think that's super cool. And the flavors from the mother's diet, like we talked about before, they're also present in the milk as well. So basically, it's continuing that flavor of education that began in the womb. And really, that further shapes which tastes feel familiar, which feel safe, which feel like home to the infant. So when you take all of this together, these findings reveal something totally remarkable about the body's original intelligence. Long before we followed and broke diet rules, we calorie counted, or lived in this chaotic food environment, our bodies adapted and responded with extraordinary precision. It's still there. It's just waiting beneath years of conditioning, habits, and noise. Remember that. So now let's talk about the rituals. By the time we were old enough to sit at a family table, we now know the conditioning was already well underway. Childhood just added another layer. It's built through experience, repetition, and emotional learning. So picture this in your own life. It's Saturday morning. You're in your PJs. There's no school today. Hallelujah. Your parents are still asleep, so no chores have been assigned yet. And the house is really quiet, like only the way it was quiet on weekend mornings. You go over, you turn on the TV, and your favorite cartoons have started. For me, it started with Super Friends. What was it? Wonder Twin Powers Activate. I loved that so much. Intermixed with Schoolhouse Rock, which is where basically most of us learned how to count by fives, and we figured out what a bill was. And what was the one with the infinity, the girl skating? I think that was another counting one. I can't remember, but I just liked it. It was very pretty. Anyways, there was that, the Globetrotters, and then my favorite, the Croft Super Show Hour, which was Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, Land of the Lost, and then my favorite, Electric Woman and Dinah Girl. Okay, the whole point of this is that then you had breakfast, and it was always a ritual, right? But Saturdays felt different. I'd pour myself a bowl of brightly colored Fruity Pebbles or Captain Crunch, the one with the peanut butter balls that reduce the roof of your mouth to pulp, right? To like a raw pulp. We considered that reasonable. It was a reasonable trade for the sugar rush that we got. And it never stopped us from pouring the next bowl. So it was fine. The cereal was usually accompanied by a piece of toasted Wonder Bread that was slathered in butter and jam, and then a big glass of Tang, because somehow we all believed that was orange juice, right? It was fine. It's healthy. Vitamin C. While I was eating the cereal, in between looking at the television, I would stare at the cereal box, the pictures on the cereal box. Sometimes there were mazes, word searches, maybe puzzles to solve. And if you were lucky, there was a prize hidden inside the cereal that somehow made it taste even better. So you had the games in front of you, and then the cartoon characters on the television, super entertaining. And then there were commercials in between that all promised the same thing. This was fun. This was happiness. This was Saturday. That was your experience. Looking back now, I don't remember thinking about sugar. I remember excitement, comfort, safety, maybe even belonging. My brain wasn't just learning to like cereals. It was learning what joy tasted like. That may sound dramatic, but it was. Psychologists call that learning classical conditioning. It's the same learning process that allows a song to transport you back to high school, or the smell of sunscreen to remember summers at the pool, let's say. When the brain repeatedly pairs an experience with a feeling, it begins to treat one as inseparable from the other. So basically, cereal wasn't just cereal. The meaning of it was Saturday. It was freedom. It was safety, excitement, and belonging. All brightly colored in my bowl. The cereal box itself was part of the conditioning. Researchers from Cornell University found that companies intentionally angled the gaze of a cereal mascot, such as Tony the Tiger, Toucan Sam, or the Trix Rabbit. They angled their gaze slightly downward to create direct eye contact with children standing in the grocery aisle. That's so crazy. They weren't just brand logos, right? They invited children to see them as familiar, trustworthy friends. Kids whose brains were still developing the ability to recognize persuasion often accepted these mascots as their friends. But those childhood messages extended far beyond the cereal box. Think about Tang. I mentioned it earlier. It became synonymous with astronauts and vitamin C. It made it seem healthy to millions of families in the 70s, although it was essentially sugar with some added vitamins. Speaking of vitamins, what about the Flintstone vitamins? They were shaped like Fred and Barney and Pebbles and Bam Bam, but they looked and tasted like candy. We were handed those every morning as an act of loving parental care, if you will. Even cereal commercials reassured us that we were eating what we were eating was part of a complete breakfast, reinforcing the idea that these foods belonged in a healthy diet. No one was trying to mislead their children, not one parent. They bought Tang, Flintstone vitamins, and sugary cereals because they believed the advertising, the health messaging, and it was the culture of the time presented as a good choice. The funny, not so funny thing is years later, when I found myself super stressed out, I reached for some of those same cereals. It wasn't because I lacked the willpower. It was that my brain had spent years rehearsing that association between sugar and security since I was 5 years old. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. Some other food rituals from our childhood and childhood today include birthday cake, ice cream, going for ice cream after sporting games and events, buttered popcorn during family movie night, pizza on Friday night because the weekend had finally arrived, or in my family, fast food for a reward or as a reward for good grades. Sometimes fast food was just so that you could soften a hard day. Long before we understood nutrition, food had already become woven into celebrations, comfort, and belonging. Those rituals became emotional maps that many of us still follow today. Repeated research consistently shows that parents strongly shape their children's relationship with food. What they eat, how they talk about food, and whether they use it as a reward or punishment all become lessons children carry into adulthood. Food in families is never just food. Think about the phrase, clean your plate, or there are starving children in Africa. It wasn't just our parents trying to make us eat our vegetables or eat the food in front of us. It was often families living through food scarcity, and food waste had once been unthinkable with them growing up. The survival logic became basically a family tradition. Treats given as comfort or food withheld as discipline, those were patterns that didn't begin with our parents. They came from the generations before them, and each passed along emotional language of food to the next generation. So by now you might be thinking like, oh, this is hopeless. If all of this begins before we're even aware, there's nothing we can do about it. We're all doomed. But that's not true. Everything we've explored in this episode explains how your relationship with food begins. It doesn't write the rest of our stories, right? Like I said, the intelligence of our biology has not disappeared. The body continues to change. The same neuroplasticity that shaped the brain in the womb and throughout childhood remains active for the rest of our lives. Our brains never lose their ability to form new associations, new patterns, new responses even. Neural pathways strengthen with each repeated use, while those we no longer use, so let's just say we stop feeding our body all the sugar, all the processed foods, those neural pathways, they become gradually quieter. That's the biology of habit change that we explored in episode 18. Awareness creates new pathways, and with repetition, those pathways become easier to follow. They become stronger, and so therefore they're easier to follow. The microbiome also continues to evolve. It responds to diet, sleep, physical activity, and to chronic stress. We know that. As it adapts, it can regain diversity over time. Meaning the gut you inherited isn't always the gut that you'll keep. Our environment continues to influence epigenetic expression throughout your life. The same mechanism that allowed stress and scarcity to alter gene expression throughout generations can also respond to safety, nourishment, and reduced chronic stress. The inheritance is real, but it won't determine the rest of your life. Before we ever made choices about food, the food was already shaping us, right? And that's not a reason for despair, but it is a reason for compassion toward yourself, toward the people who raised you, and toward the child who was absorbing the world exactly as the developing brain is designed to do. Beneath all of that conditioning is the version of you who simply knew hunger, who knew satisfaction, who ate because the body asked for food and stopped because the body had had enough. That self has not disappeared. It's simply become a little bit harder to hear. You are responsible for the choices you make today, but not for the conditions under which those choices first developed. Understanding where those patterns came from is how we begin to find our way back to our original self. In the next episode, we're moving into a new territory. Episode 20 is menopause, metabolism, and the 8 p.m. problem. We'll explore what happens as the body changes through midlife, including hormones, circadian rhythms, evening hunger, and why so many people feel like the rules suddenly changed without anyone sending them a memo. I'm that person. This episode is for all of you, but it is for me as well. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you'd like to learn more about working with me, you'll find all my contact information in the episode notes. But until next time, take care and have a wonderful day.